We start the second session of the 11th World Conference on Bioethics here in Gijón in Spain. It is a pleasure to introduce to you the chairwoman of this first roundtable, Ms. Doña Blanca Cañedo, President of Foundation Mar de Niebla. And then we have some speakers, Ms. Paula Martino da Silva. Dear Paula, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. She is a member of the SIBI since the foundation in 1997. And then Ms. Vitulia Yvonne from Italy, fresh blood for the scientific committee of the SIBI. She should have been introduced at the Congress in 2020, but it could not take place because of the pandemic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcelo. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much, Marcelo, for everything, for inviting me and for organizing the Congress again. And I will give the floor to Ms. Paula Martino da Silva with a talk entitled Reaching Agreements and Setting Priorities in the Use of Biotechnologies. A very interesting topic. So, Ms. Paula, you have the floor. Thank you so much. Hello. Good morning. I am having a connectivity problem. I don't know if it is my problem or it is your issue. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear you very well. Yeah, you can hear you. We can hear you very well. Thank you. Okay. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much for having invited me to be here this morning. It's always a pleasure to participate at SIBI congresses. I want to greet my dear friend Marcelo Palacios and all the members of the SIBI, and greetings to Gijón, a beautiful city. I love Gijón, and I really want to visit it as soon as possible. I also want to greet warmly my colleagues from Painero. It is a pleasure to be with you all and learn from you all. Who could tell us when almost 2 years ago I was proposed to talk about this topic that we would be here today facing a pandemic that radically changed our lives, our priorities in the way we regard science, ethics, and many political decisions. The new scientific advances, as for example, genome edition, that was addressed at Bioethics Fora, this has become the past, regardless of the extraordinary research projects that are still being carried out. However, during this time, we have devoted to our reflection on how to handle the pandemic, to make possible that everybody has access to health services, to invest more on science, and to trust more and more on health. Research is also an emergency to establish plans and try to manage uncertainty. Our priorities have become almost exclusively in terms of health, to save lives and protect lives, to look for new treatments and to research vaccines. Scientists now have new responsibilities, additional responsibilities, and social responsibility in terms of the development of new diagnosis trials, new life supports, development of new antiviral drugs, development of vaccines. There was a need of having faster projects by authorities, safeguarding rigor in terms of evaluation related to efficacy and safety of vaccines and drugs. International bodies or bioethic committees very soon drafted their own recommendations, declarations on ethical principles that should guide the medical and political decisions during pandemic. In this example, I want to share with you three international organizations that are the most representatives with the bioethics committees: UNESCO, with the IBC, the Council of Europe with its own bioethics committee, and the European Commission with the EGE. The most significant reports drafted during 2020 and 2021. And curiously enough, we can see that they always start with recommendations and declarations that are more general in terms of principles or guiding underlying principles, ethical principles as well. And then they start to specify and go a little bit more in detail, focusing on more specific topics, as for example, vaccines or vaccine agendas. In all of them, we will find common principles: solidarity, cooperation, international cooperation, resources, equity in terms of access to health, protection of vulnerable groups, communication, transparent communication, research practices should be responsible, among other topics. When biotech co-founders Techi and Urgotzain, in a recent interview with the newspaper El País, they said this vaccine is just the very beginning. And with this statement, they are opening up to a new vaccine age. The doors are open to new types of vaccines, new research areas, a new drug class, discussion on vaccination per se, whether it should be compulsory or not, who should be vaccinated, who should not, how to produce vaccines, where to produce vaccines, and the investment to be allocated, how to make possible all the opportunities in terms of research. Where shall we assign the resources? As my friend Pérez Contometet writes in his book entitled Why and How Science is Done, to claim for the freedom of research and academic freedom of expression of scientific ideas, as well as philosophical ideas or any other type of ideas in the academic field, and not to try to control research or scientific research by politicians. Sciences are developed in a framework of freedom and democracy needs an independent science to be developed. Finish of the quote, or end of quote. How to decide the actions to be implemented? We have lost sound, bad connectivity. I am so sorry. We should invest in social and economic relationships on a national and global level. The answers given by ethics should influence political decisions that in the end determine the legal decisions that guide the society. Sorry, we are finding problems to follow the speech because it is connectivity is not very good. Sorry, so we are losing track of the whole speech. We will do our best. The apparently fragile dialogue between bioethics and law is facing a huge challenge when the political power has to make decisions and legislate. Whatever we do now, the values and the topics to be addressed now, and the way in which we implement them will have an impact on our future. The times we're living today, when we have to take urgent health decisions also condition the existence of bioethics, its reflection, and the search for consensus. If the reflection has already been consolidated, or at least it already has a structure, sorry, connectivity problems again, the decisions will be more ethically accepted. We all agree with the principles of solidarity, international cooperation, responsibility, equity, etc., etc. However, the fact that we agree on principles, it is not enough. In my opinion, we have to take into account on how to implement them. However, sorry, bad connectivity again. We are losing track of the speech. Sorry. For example, in a very recent case, who is going to be admitted in emergency units in times of the pandemic, when making political legislative decisions, it is necessary to reflect, to consider what are the shared goods between the different individuals in society. We have to address the values that can be questioned. We have to decide what is the most appropriate when making the decisions and the consequences of that decision in the future. The ethics of the minimum principles that is typical of democracies, as my dear Professor Deogracia mentions, considers that consensus in democracy is not possible without accepting minimum objectives or priorities, among which we have the minimum moral objectives. And for that, we need to comply with several statements. First, that moral is not merely conventional, and it is not just a mere result of the strategy or an agreement, but rather it can be considered objectively. And this moral has different levels, and also that ethics and law are different things, but they are closely related. Many mentioned that the main cause of the difficulty to reach a real consensus was the impossibility of achieving a moral pluralism. And my dear Adela Cortina also mentioned that in our society there is a system of moral polytheism in which moral solutions cannot be shared, as they suffer from some chronic conditions of our social life. For example, the lack of tolerance, the scarce possibility of dialogue, the living together, the tolerance, and the sharing seem to be three key terms for the training of the moral civilian, of the civilian moral, giving way to the transition towards law. It is necessary to recover, therefore, the whole moral in which we as a society, in fact, we accept to share certain values, and we trust and think that certain consensus is the only procedure to access universal norms or laws. Sorry, bad connectivity again. We are not hearing the full statements or the full sentences, and we are losing track because we can only hear some words. We will continue doing our best. Sorry. Again, poor connectivity. It's totally frozen. And all this should allow for political decisions and that are closer to citizenship, and they are more democratic and more fair. Bioethics, therefore, may become a guiding thread that is closer to the citizenship and also transits in the political and legal spheres, maintaining its own characteristics and becoming an invaluable aid to get the citizenship closer to the political power. We have to take into account it is fundamental to maintain a distinction between the ethic functions and the roles of the political leaders at different levels. As Adela Cortina states, the moral laws have to be positive and they have to be turned into an action. So those responsible for the formulation of politics should take into account not only ethical values, but also political, legal values. As you know, sometimes there could be shocks between different values, and a political decision usually only obeys strategic or economic values in detriment of decisions that are ethically more acceptable. On the other hand, the transition of ethics to law is not a straight line or a straight pathway or in one just direction or sense. There are different influences coming from many sectors, society, stakeholders, lobbies, etc., until we have the law. And that path sometimes, well, is stopped and it never reaches the final destination. Sometimes there is the confusion that it is not timely to legislate. Sorry, bad connectivity again. It's been very difficult to translate because we are not listening to the whole sentence. And it is expressed in different ways on a national level. Laws, professional norms, jurisprudence, etc., and everything integrating also the international pacts or conventions or adapting the most sacred principles and translated into recommendations and guidelines that are representative to establish and share standards, recommendations, and practices in bioethics is crucial. Its universal vocation constitutes a real challenge, a democratic challenge in the continuous search of consensus, trying to contribute to the development of life sciences, health policies, as for example, the establishment or the drafting of global practices in bioethics. But the path is not easy. If we take into account, for example, just a mere example, the principle of primacy of the human being, that is also closely linked to equity access to health services, for example, Oviedo Agreement, no? A happy name of that agreement or pact. But those of the Oviedo document are very similar of the UNESCO Bioethics Universal Declaration. The principle of supremacy of the human being that should prevail over the interest of society. Or the Article 3.0 that refers to benefits of health. It is necessary to ensure equitable access to health services of high quality. However, how are we going to implement all these principles? Because after all, the primacy of the or supremacy of the human being is what prevails. How do we integrate this in the practice? How can we take into account the legal norms of every state and the universalism of all the principles? However, every human being, every community declares human rights with its own accent, depending on their own goods, resources, and needs, depending on what they want to preserve or declare. Nowadays, it is necessary to establish limits and to specify what we aim at. This decision will many times determine the options to be proposed and the use to be done to the use of the technologies available. For example, in the case of the modification of human genome, what is the limit between improvement and therapy? Is it possible to trace that difference? Is it possible to establish different lines separating improvement from therapy? What is the improvement measure? Another example, in the case of the gene edition or editing, what is safe and what is not safe? In another different case, euthanasia, for example, how can we measure the unbearable suffering? Another case, also very different, that has to do with the artificial intelligence, AI. What can we consider as sufficiently human? There are some things in our recent history that have become decisive landmarks and that have proven how to, for example, obtain some documents, for example, the Nuremberg Code. 50 years after the prohibition of human cloning, the fear of this cloning is generating a global rejection on a scientific level as well on a society level. And the result of it all is the prohibition of any intervention that aims at creating a human being genetically identical to another human being, or at the end of the 2018 with the genetic editing. The international community was unanimous when rejecting what is understood by application of genetic editing related to the birth, the successful birth of the first human beings born on the basis of gene editing for non-therapeutic aims. But this was not just stopped at 2018, and the COVID-19 arrived to, go back to the classical topics discussed in the framework of bioethics, as, for example, the scarce resources, clinical research, or the citizenship awareness on health decisions. Different from other previous situations in which topics were discussed on just a theoretical level or just as an exercise for future decisions, in the COVID age, decisions had to be made on a political and legislative level very fast, in an urgent way. And this was very important also in relation to the understanding of the relationships between law and bioethics. The slogan, trust in science, has become all of a sudden an imperative. Scientists and health professionals have become the main players in the dialogue with the political power. Ethics was addressed in some extreme situations with observers who should have access to health services firstly, but we could see the imbalance. To quote a queen, the political response in terms of COVID-19 does not imply the look for the guilty ones, but rather we need leaders that are trained in a scientific idea and aware of the disasters, natural disasters, and ready to give priority to ethics. End of quote. We should use science to help us solve unexpected problems in times of uncertainty. And ethics should be used to include values that are useful to the citizens and society. But this balance, although very necessary, sometimes has not been safeguarded. So some entities, as for example, in UK, the Council of Bioethics, its president David Archer even said, and I'm say it in English, so no need to translate.
Does not mean that ethics has no place at all. En cualquiera de los casos descritos,
In any of the
concluiremos
examples described, we may conclude by saying that relationship between politics and ethics is not translated into a straight line, but rather a more complex shape, elliptical, circle, a loop, and it is subject to different factors. It has different needs of response. In some cases, it has enough just by the mere application of consent to international principles, but in other cases, it needs a new solid basis of debate to construct a coherent political decision-making process. So the decisions we make today, I repeat again, will have an impact on the whole society. The way in which we reflect on these principles will many times determine the type of society we want to build. And here we reach a crossroad where we look at the past, but where we also have to face the future. Pandemic has brought about other problems that have always existed in all societies, and that many times we thought they had been solved and already were something of the past. But no, they were not solved. We needed a new language, a language of the international cooperation. The pandemic came along with a new reflection on health services, protection of vulnerable groups. And we were urged to make specific decision on how to distribute the scarce resources with equity and in a universal way. We will continue neglecting this in the future, and will we postpone the responses society needs? And the same goes for, just as an example, in terms of responsibility of future generations. This was addressed by a report to be published this year by the Committee on Ethics of UNESCO that starts on a reflection on Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Bioethics of UNESCO. It is called Protecting Future Generation. It is very interesting indeed. And it says, we should take into account the inclusion of life health sciences in future generations, and more specifically on their genetic constitution. And this is very interesting because this declaration was published in 2005 when the big discussion was on genetics. And it is still today so. But today the focus has changed slightly. Focus has to be wider and much more current. Not only to focus on genetics, we have to protect the interests of future generations, and this should be regarded as a collective and shared responsibility. We all have to be aware of our role as administrators of the world we live in, and more specifically on behalf of the future generations. So We need to provide options that have an impact on future generations. We have to use positive and negative aspects of the pandemic, COVID-19, to get ready for future pandemics that may affect future generations. This is also our challenge. The whole society will have to decide on that. Bioethics should be regarded as a tool to take participatory democracy to the scenario of life and management of body. I will finish by quoting Mr. Antonio Muñoz Molina, a Spanish writer I admire a lot, and I owe him the best pleasures offered by reading. He wrote in an article in El País, a newspaper. El País, as you know, is a newspaper that I love reading. So he wrote, Antonio Muñoz Molina, an article in El País on his book. And this book is, well, the location is in Lisbon. And I quote, "Time acts as a mixer of memory materials, mixes these materials and subject them to whatever we have lived and leaves them there ready so that they become the fertile soil of fiction." End of quote. I hope that the future leaves our memory intact of what we have lived and experienced during this pandemic, so that we commit ourselves to consolidate and implement the principles handled to reach consensus, so that the old problems are not prolonged throughout the time, but rather we reach an efficient solution in the future, and so that we can face in a better way the new challenges whenever they come along. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's been highly interesting and very much up to date and current, because you've addressed the pandemic and what's happened with the World Health Organization. And I do believe that bioethics is going to play a vital role. You can prepare your questions if you wish to pose one after the next talk by Vitulia Yvonne. And we will have some time to answer questions to both speakers after this next talk. Ms. Yvonne is going to talk to us about the Italian Microbiome Initiative for Improved Human Health and Agri-Food Production, Responsible Use of Biotechnologies. Welcome, Vitulia, to our virtual conference, and you now have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much to the SIBI for involving me and engaging me in this important scientific initiative, which is the cherry on the top of the SIBI's work in the past years. I fully agree with the statement that the world of ethics, and especially bioethics, needs to take on and assume an important role in the face of financial and economic interests, which pose a risk to science and the welfare of people and their rights. I sincerely hope that we can all be healthy and meeting in person in the next conference. I would like to express my gratitude to the Principality of Asturias, the University of Oviedo, the Spanish National Scientific Research Council, and the City of Gijón. I would like to thank Dr. Bianca Cañedo and Dr. Martinho da Silva, who is sharing this prestigious experience with me. I found her talk truly brilliant. I'm going to focus on the European's Common Agricultural Policy, the European Pact, and its experiences, and then I will delve into the Italian microbiome project. Additionally, I've included a reference to the current government's plan to distribute the funds coming from the European Union. And lastly, I will share some considerations on a bill that was presented before the Italian Senate a couple of days ago on organic or eco agriculture, which has sparked a strong debate. Speaking of microorganisms that can save agriculture and help improve human health can be a paradox because right now the entire planet is collapsing because of a virus. However, as I was writing my talk for today, I saw that many other microorganisms can provide endless ecosystem services from which all human beings and all living creatures on the planet can benefit without even knowing them. Those services are fundamental for resilience, stability, and productivity of ecosystems and agroecosystems. We can state that 60 years of green revolution have increased welfare, have reduced the percentage of people who suffer famine in the world. It has released many workers of heavy duties and heavy work. And this whole movement was characterized by the independence of agrochemicals and the use of substances based on biotypes. Two innovations that are strongly connected to each other because one was heavily reliant on the other. We know the consequences attached to some of the issues that I have mentioned: water pollution, high water consumption, negative consequences on ecosystems, and climate change. Climate change, together with the pandemic and plastic pollution, seems to be the next step in the world collapse. Another consequence are extreme natural disasters, which are becoming more frequent and violent, and in taking place in regions that used to be safe, so to speak. This new pandemic comes after other epidemics that became more intense in the 21st century. According to some prestigious scientists and institutions, this is not entirely unrelated with the behavior of humankind with regards to nature, the elimination of natural habitats, the deforestation, and so on and so forth. And therefore, there is a risk to there's a risk for viruses to move from one species to another. Um, I'm not a chemical expert. I'm a lawyer. So my work here is to tackle the decisions and the issues around them that have been taking place over the past years. The European Union's agricultural policy has changed substantially in the last years to respond to the citizenships expectations and needs. When we talk about the Europeans' Common Agricultural Policy, we talk about a wider range of areas, including food quality, traceability, the promotion of agricultural farms. And in addition to this, the European Union provides financial support to farmers, and it promotes sustainable, environmentally friendly practices, um, while investing in new developments. So the European institutions uh, participate in the evaluation and follow-up of agriculture and food policies. The national and local authorities implement the norms and regulations that are passed on a European level. Farmers can benefit from the uh, available funds in the European budget according to or complying with the European regulation, and the European Union in turn monitors and assesses the implementation and effectiveness of such funds. What is the Common Agricultural Policies? It was created in 1972, and we could talk about a link between agriculture and society. This was 1962. That was quite a long time ago. And what are its aims, its purposes? When we talk about the CAP, supporting farmers, improving agricultural productivity, ensuring a certain, a reasonable quality of life for European farmers, contributing to sustainable management of natural resources, preserving landscapes and rural areas throughout Europe, keep rural economy alive, foster employment in agriculture, among others. This CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, has evolved throughout the years to respond to a number of changing economic circumstances as well as the demands of the citizenship. What is the legal basis of the CAP? It's governed by the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, more specifically in Articles 39 and 40. Article 39 sets forth the objectives of the CAP, and it states that these are improving agricultural productivity throughout a technical improvement and fostering optimal use of the production factors, specifically workforce, ensuring a equal quality of life for farmers, stabilize markets, ensure the availability of supply, and ensuring that the products reach consumers at a reasonable price. Article 40 introduces the common organization of agricultural markets to reach the objectives of the CAP. Common rules on competition, mandatory coordination of the different market institutions in the different member states, and a European organizational framework. We have four European regulations, which are the specific law sources that govern the CAP. Regulation 1317, 1318, and 1356, all of which from 2013, about the organization coordination of the CAP, the support to rural development, and so on. And you know that if that you can talk about a policy, but the point is who is funding what. And from a financial point of view, the CAP is funded based on two funds: the European Guarantee Agricultural Fund and the European Rural Development Fund. It is clear that each European country manages the distribution of the funds, and it publishes the data of the recipients of such funds in accordance with the European regulation on transparency. In order to improve this process, the European Union periodically consults with a group of experts who provide their knowledge and with the agriculture committees in these groups. They provide their know-how, their insights to the European Union. For example, the operational group on agriculture markets, which deals with unloyal market practices, which are quite frequent. When it comes to plan and suggest new European regulation, the European Commission conducts impact evaluations addressing the needs of the European Union, the potential regulations and their impact. And who regulates the CAP? It's the so-called General Directorate of the European Commission, which is responsible for agriculture and rural development. And in order to, they can pass two types of acts: delegate acts and execution acts. In 2008, and now with the pandemic, with both financial crisis and the environmental impact of agriculture, explain the role of the of public institutions. So we come to 2019. The pandemic was not there yet, and the European Union um, passed a European Green Compact, which set a strategy to move to a green and a clean, transparent, circular economy. It aimed at restoring biodiversity and mitigate pollution. This compact describes the funding tools available and necessary, and it explains how to organize a fair, inclusive transition. These are important words: fair, just, and inclusive for the most vulnerable. The European Union aspires to being neutral, carbon neutral by 2050. And in order to achieve this, it will have to act throughout all sectors of the economy, invest in environmentally friendly technologies, support the industry, deploy public and private transportation that is cleaner and healthier, decarbonize the energy sector, guarantee or ensure that services are energetically more efficient, and collaborate on an international level to improve global environmental regulation. Please remember all of the above, because these points are included in the Italian recovery plan to recover from an economic situation that is absolutely problematic. Italy has issues with employment, youth, unemployment, everything you can think about. Italy has a problem with in financial terms. This plan has been presented before the Italian parliament, and it's going to reach Europe. It's going to be submitted to the European Union so that it is taken into consideration and see whether it is adaptable to the plans that the European Union has, especially with regards to the European Green Compact. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to explain two things. As I was writing these pages, something happened. The European Recovery Plan was announced, and a bill, and it's very important for me to explain these using some words on this interesting microbiome project from Italy. It's clear that understanding the mechanisms of plants and how they interact with their microbiomes can be a tremendous tool to improve plant farming and health and contribute to the creation of new strategies to tackle sustainable agriculture. There are several approaches to improve the microbiome. There are direct and indirect approaches. With the microbiome project, Italy has devised a research project that is inspired on an open project in the United States of America. It's a citizen science project. It's a type of research that is not privately funded or funded by a government institution, but it's based on the contributions of individuals. Unlike other research protocols, which select a limited number of participants based on a number of specific criteria, this project makes it possible for anyone to participate, and it actually promotes and encourages as many people as possible to participate in this research project. The objective is to compile an atlas of bacterial species in Italy, which have been selected for our specific lifestyle. That's why people from all ages are welcome in this project, regardless of their lifestyle, the type of food they eat, and both healthy and people with pathologies. The participation of all citizens in this research project benefits the project in a number of areas, sequencing the gut microbiome, and creating a sample. And once that sample is in the laboratory, it's introduced in an instrument that looks for bacterial gene segments, specifically one called rRNA16, which allows the identification of all bacterial families in an individual. They vary from one person to another, and they can sometimes be linked to pathologies whose causes are not known. Sometimes they can lead to metabolic disorders. It is clear that sequencing the gut microbiome has no value with regards to diagnosis, but it contributes to expanding the knowledge base, which could be useful in the future for medical diagnosis purposes. The aim of the project is to evaluate the intestinal Italian microbiome population and develop a database on this. I have 8 minutes left. As everyone knows, before the 30th of April, all member states of the European Union had to submit their national recovery and resilience plan to the European Commission. The document stating the objectives to channel the European funds that will be distributed among the member states as a result of a historical plan to face the financial consequences of the pandemic. It's a stimulus package that is unprecedented, also because the Next Generation Q funds are part of a wider framework, a 7-year budget from 2021 2028 with a total value of around 1.8 billion euros. And Italy has requested a significant amount. €191,500,000 is what Italy has requested based on an agreement that started to be negotiated after the climate crisis. Remember the Paris Agreement in 2015, and it was forecast that potentially catastrophic disasters could take place in the future, such as this pandemic. The Italian plan is targeted at women, youth, young people from southern Italy, and it aims at bridging territorial gaps within the country and social gaps. This plan is organized in 6 different areas, and one is green transition, and that one and that area devotes a total 68 million euros, and its objectives are economic resilience, sustainability, ensuring a fair, inclusive transition, investment and reforms to achieve circular economy, and local public transportation with um, low emission buses, renovation or renovating the train fleet, etc. The government has to undertake significant investment in renewable energies and simplify the authorization procedures in this industry, supporting the hydrogen supply chain, and so on and so forth. This is a very ambitious plan, and we hope that it will succeed. A project was presented before the Italian parliament to protect, develop, and make food agriculture production more competitive with organic foods. This project is aiming at supporting the agricultural transition, and it aims at helping Italy line up with the European strategies and the European Compact. This project is of the it's very important because when you read the first article, you see a word that is somewhat complicated. Mention is made of a biodynamic agriculture. You've probably heard about a philosopher, Rudolf Steiner, who in 1924 invented the biodynamic movement, a philosophical vision about the fertility of soils, agriculture that fits into a vision of cosmic forces, astral, spiritual energies. According to Steiner, all of these energies are embedded in our existence. Let me state that this is an interesting design, an interesting plan, because it takes all of our laws, all of our acts from different areas, and its objective is to create a joint plan, a single plan for agricultural matters. But some Italian policies have said that biodynamic agriculture is an esoteric practice, which is non compliant with the scientific approach. According to these politicians, this is a nothing more than a branding, an esoteric approach coming from a private brand. After 14 months of the pandemic, this shows how the relationship between science and law is complicated. Science moves at a high pace, at a fast pace, but the law is slow. It needs times to study things and come with conclusions. A bill is being developed currently in the Italian Parliament, which will spark a very interesting debate soon in Italy. I hope that our country is wise enough to choose what's best for human health and the environment. Thank you very much. That could have not been more interesting, dear Dr. Ivona, because we kind of knew about some of the work that has been carried out about the microbiome, but in Spain, there are areas that have very low population density, and one of the reasons is low or insufficient support to farmers. So I think it's time for questions. I don't know if you have a question for each other.
So time for Q&A, and thank you very much for your presentations. It has been an honor to have you both. There is no question currently. Anything else to add? I know that you haven't had much time. You had some time restrictions, but otherwise, well, we will leave it at that. And we will reflect upon these topics because you have addressed many interesting issues. Thank you very much to you both. Thank you. Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, great pleasure. And good work. And I hope you have a very fruitful Congress the next following days. Thank you.
Continuamos con las sesiones del Congreso Mundial de Bioética y en esta ocasión de la mañana corresponde moderar la mesa a los
Next roundtable will be chaired by Ms. Vitulina Ivone, professor on civil law at the University of Salerno, also member of the scientific committee of the SIBI. First, she will chair some debate with Ifutaki, the underground photographer who is advocating for the environment, and then we will have other people during the debate. If at the end of the day, as we mentioned, we chair men and women, there is some free time, that we would start with the Q&A and the questions posed by people here at the Congress Hall, or also people who post the questions on Twitter or whatever other social media. We'll now give the floor to our chairwoman. Thank you very much, Marcelo Palacios, and without further ado, we'll now start the Q&A with Eve Futaki. As you know, she is an underground photographer, Guinness record in apnea immersion. She gave us a talk on that yesterday. Beautiful images. And there will be a debate with some high school students from Asturias, and the title is Worldwide Commitment on the Responsible Use of Biotechnologies in Medicine and Environment. We will start with the high school, Belina Ferra from Ribadesella. Good morning to you all. We are giving a talk in streaming from our high school in Ribadesella. The first thing I want to do is to introduce my colleagues. Lucas and Ilse, Paula, and I am Carla. And together we have done the work that we're going to share with you now. Sorry, we cannot hear. Sorry, we cannot hear a thing. It's impossible to translate. The sound is very, very low. Sorry. We really apologize, but we cannot hear it at all. So it's impossible to translate. The volume is really low, and unfortunately, we cannot translate, not even guess what she's saying. Apologies. Our work focuses on responsible and rational use of biotechnologies in environment and medicine. The general framework of this meeting, and more specifically, we have focused on the current uses of the synthetic biology. The title is The Future of Human Creation, highlighting this aspect. What things, sorry, is the sound is just too bad to translate simultaneously, sorry. There are many interferences and the volume is not correct, sorry. New technological fields have come up. One of them is synthetic biology. The term of synthetic biology was first used firstly by 1912. In 1912, by a researcher who looked into osmosis. And from then on, and in terms of synthetic biology, we have reached many advances. For example, the first cyber and other topics. Sorry, the sound is not very good. We're doing our best. So probably in 20 years, we can see some of these entities on the street in a routinary way. But up to what extent? Sorry, it's just that we are trying to guess what the girl is saying. Apologies, but sound is honestly not good enough to offer simultaneous interpreting. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. If it improves, we will continue. Sorry. Apologies. Everything results from the field of generation of fabrics. So we compare technological processes with the computing processes. We see different things. Computing has been created by the humankind, and biology has been discovered by the human being. There are endless question marks on biology, so there, and the functioning of life, whereas the data processed by the computer are created by man, no, by the human being or by the humankind system. We also have to take into account the appearance of artificial life. Just 1 second, please. The chairwoman is trying to interrupt the students. Well, it is the science. Yes, excuse me. We are going to ask the school, Abelina Ferrat, to adjust a little bit the micro because the sound is not very good. You are doing a great job, but unfortunately, the volume or the mic is not providing good result. Please let me know when you can hear better, says the girl. Obviously, it is not always possible to forecast on the basis of an algorithm because there are always exceptions that are an exception and they are innovative but cannot be forecasted. What we're going to present now, introduce now, are some of the results of this current science. We will talk firstly about tumors, which are beings manufactured by organic matter and also electronic devices to improve the organic capacities. This could improve the quality of life of people. As they improve some corporal mechanisms, they can overcome deficiencies, so they can even improve some functions. As an example, we have Nick Harbison, who is a British cyborg artist who was the first man in being acknowledged by the government as a cyborg. As this government, a British government, access to his passport through the photo antenna. This antenna is not just another device, but rather a part of his body. This antenna sends some signals to a chip that is inside his skull and turns the light frequencies into vibrations, and that allows to listen to colors. He has a visual condition so that he only sees in black and white. Another example is Rivas. Is a cyborg artist from Catalonia. She can, through the sensors on the ankles, sense the earthquakes on the earth. She also wears some earrings that also have some sensors that allow her to feel the movement behind her. She thinks that being cyborg is a whole entity because just by the mere fact of carrying a device in your body, that does not mean that the person is a cyborg. For example, some patients. And then Manuel Muñoz is also a Catalan cyborg artist. He inserts some head devices to perceive some other sensorial movements. He developed a sensoriographic program. Sorry, the sound is very, very poor. Sorry, we really apologize. The fins that he carries on the side of his head are some kind of implants and that allow him to listen to atmosphere pressure, humidity, and even temperature changes. In 2010, Il Harbison, together with Rivas, founded the Cyber Foundation, aiming at the right of people to become cyborg by implementing electronic devices in their bodies, and as well as promoting Art Cyborg. From the Creation Cyber Foundation has worked with different associations, for example, Pride Without Borders, taking people who were blind to from Ecuador, for example, installing some antennas to perceive colors in these blind people. Another program in Spain is the Transmission Society project founded by Rivas and Harbison together with Muñoz. And the project aims at giving visibility to people. Sorry, it's impossible to understand. We really apologize because it seems to be very interesting, but we cannot really do an accurate translation. There are other devices that are included in the body of a person to replace the natural organ and to try to restore a specific function or a set of functions in the human body. Another advance would be the printing of organs in 3D printers. Each printing material would allow you to create some cells, and you could even produce a human organ, fabric, or a tissue, or whatever. Some of them have been tested in animals. These bio inks are liquids that have living cells and growth factors, and thanks to that, the cells can be reproduced, transforming this liquid into biological tissue. As an example, we may say that in 2017, researchers from the University of Northwestern were able to implant a printed ovary to give solutions to women with fertility problems. In 2019, the researchers identified some proteins in a pig ovaries, so they could print in 3D ovaries for human use. In 2019, Some investigators from Newcastle developed the first cell to be transplanted in some people with mental conditions. And then some Israeli researchers created a bioprinted heart in 4 hours only, and with all the parts of the heart, although the size is that of the heart of a rabbit, and it has not been tested in human beings yet. A long time ago, when an organ of our body failed, the only possibility was the donation, and to be lucky that it was compatible. Nowadays, it is a reality, the manufacturing of organs. Thanks to biotechnology, different studies have been done looking into the human organs, from limbs, even other organs such as the heart, that can be created to the size we wish, and therefore they are 100% compatible with our body. Also, biotechnology has allowed that surgeries are less painful. But what are, in fact, the disadvantages of this science? To live longer may be a positive aspect. If when we reach a certain age, our body starts to show the consequences of the passing of time, with the replacement of organs, we can postpone death. For example, a person 80 years old has a kidney condition and needs a transplant. At that age, well, the surgery is quite complex. But if we replace the organ, or we just create some improved aspects so that this person lives longer, currently we cannot continue research, and maybe in the future this is possible. Education also has its role to be played in this issue. Our experts are studying every day for the well-being of our society to cure diseases. It is obvious that the surgeon has to practice so that one day can face the surgeries with patients, but to practice you need materials, a synthetic matter or material that is similar to the one we have in our bodies. Obviously, you can also use animals that have similar anatomy to that of the human being. When we create limbs or organs of the human body, then the surgeons and the physicians can practice with them. The personal and health advantages are obvious, but also economic or financial advantages. If the donor has just died, first you have to transfer the body, the organs, and with a good equipment to be well preserved. And also the organ has a lifespan, so you have to be fast. Health has to be a priority. The welfare has to join the people, because health, if you're healthy personally, if every individual is healthy, then we will have a healthy society. So we should use that health and to try to promote health in the whole society. Sorry, but they go really fast, and they are reading a text which we do not have. My classmate has shared with you the kind phase of this field of action. We also have to face hindrances or shortcomings of biotechnology. On the one hand, we should think whether all the individuals can or could in the future allow for a new organ, as it is a very customized process. Usually it is very expensive. For example, we can compare it to current dental surgeries. Some people cannot afford it, and most of the population in poor countries cannot afford it. Those who cannot afford to pay for that new organ probably will not be able to have a better health, and therefore the gap between the poor people and rich people will be widened. This gap is not only a financial gap. If we decide to create improved organs, a brain, for example, with a calculated capacity, then the society may be unfair, and some people may be in advantage in detriment of others. As these cases will be very difficult to identify, will be difficult to establish controls. So there will be some people with an improved profile, so they will be part of a superior breed, so to speak, or race. Some people will win all the marathons and other people will not. Design yourself. With this objective, the Cyber Foundation, the platform created 7 years ago in platform mentioned by my classmate, to claim the right of human beings to implant technology in their body without any medical prescription. In recent years, they have helped several people to expand their senses and competencies through cybernetics. For example, Manuel Muñoz or Rivers are two cyborgs. Are we really biologically prepared to perceive so many things? Could we be causing problems related to that overstimulus? Are we using incoherently those new technologies? Min is another example. He wanted to implant an artificial organ. This opens up other questions. Should we hybridate other species? How to establish the limit between human beings and other species? What would be our identity? Up to what extent are we humans? When do we stop being humans? So we decide how to proceed. Instead of adapting ourselves to the natural environment, we decide for the competencies we want in our body. This will probably have an impact on other species. And this poses a risk in terms of the meaning of life and also our legitimacy on how to guide our evolution, more specifically the human evolution. Thank you so much to the three of you. You only have 1 minute left. Thank you very much. 1 minute left. Sorry. 1 minute left. Sorry. Thank you very much for your attention, and all of us hope that it has been very interesting. Thank you very much. Carla and her classmates, thank you so much. E. Sabrina Ferra from Ribesella now has the floor. The E. Suebe from Arriondas. I recall that you have only 15 minutes left.
¿Se nos escucha?
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, maybe too loud. Is it better now? Kind of reverberates. Okay. Hello to everybody. We are a group of students from the ES Surveys from Ribadesella. I am Santiago, is Carlela. We're going to tell you about the origin of antibiotics and how they have resulted into bacteria. The sound again is not very good, unfortunately. Well, origin of antibiotics. The term antibiotics comes from the term antibiosis, which defines the impossibility of some organisms to live in the presence of others. This term was assigned as a result of the investigations by Koch and Pasteur in 1877. The first antibiotic, penicillin, was discovered by Chesney in 1897, although the first research works were by Fleming. He was culturing some bacteria from the species Staphylococcus when a contamination by fungi showed that this segregated to the culture a substance that prevented from other organisms to grow. And the discovery of antibiotics has been one of the main advances of medicine because they have a capacity to control pathogens and therefore fight against infections. Development of antibiotics together with the improvement of life of citizens and discoveries in the field of medicine and implementation of health systems have been very important for the life expectancy in the 20th century. It has been multiplied by 2. Sorry, the sound is not very good again. However, in terms of antibiotics, some errors have been made, and therefore some issues have arisen because in little time they stop being natural substances produced by fungi, and they are now uncontrollable compounds. For example, antibiotics used to be prescribed to cure any kind of infectious disease without taking into account whether they were viral conditions, for example. And in these cases, antibiotics are useless. They have been sold over the counter as well, and therefore they are very common to try to cure any kind of pain or condition. Sorry, the sound is very bad, and they are wearing masks, which is even making it more difficult to understand. We really apologize. Antibiotics are also being used to prevent plagues. In some countries, even 80% of antibiotics manufactured have been used in the farming industry or cattle industry. I'm sorry, they are wearing masks. It's impossible to understand. The bacteria, in terms of superbacteria, they derive from the natural selection process. Many of them become resistant, and the superbacteria are also underlying some infectious diseases. It is estimated that 35,000 deaths occur in Europe due to these infectious diseases. What is important is that we are addressing a health crisis, unprecedented health crisis. Again, we apologize for the translation, but the sound is very poor and the kids are wearing masks, which make it very difficult to understand. To verify this information, we have contacted Hove Hospital in Gijón. Microbiologists think that for an antibiotic to be efficient needs a sensitivity greater than 80%, because a lower sensitivity then would make it inefficient. Although there are many antibiotics with a high percentage of sensitivity, for example, fosfomitin, it is also seen to check that other antibiotics, as for chlorantin and amoxicillin, are already in the limit of that 80%. Experts mentioned that this low tendency will result in the limited use of this antibiotic. Other antibiotics have been used very often in the 80s, and the sensitivity has been lowered, and it is now at about 65%. There are antibiotics with a very high sensitivity percentage, for example, in Intenem, but it is not being very much used because resistances are to be avoided. Authorities have decided to take measures. For example, antibiotics has been prohibited over the counter so that the population do not buy so many antibiotics. And also the European Union has drafted 2 norms to limit the use of antibiotics. The first one in 2006, prohibiting the use just as a stimulating of the growth of the cattle. And another one will come into force in 2022 and stipulates that in the cattle industry, only antibiotics can be used when prescribed by an expert that says that the problem cannot be solved without any antibiotics. Although these measures are not very determining, the consumption of antibiotics has been decreased by animals and by human beings.
And now let's talk about science, which is a tool that is closer and closer to human beings. It's becoming easier to use. And over the past years, we have witnessed great development of biotechnologies, especially in biomedicine and genetic engineering. The creation of genetically modified organisms are subject to more simple protocols. We've heard about the news of a discovery by Spanish scientists in Chinese laboratories where they created a hybrid organisms. This is just to show that bringing science into our lives is becoming easier and easier. For example, plants that can adapt to different types of climates or that are resistant to plagues, etc. But all these techniques must be strictly controlled by international organisms and bodies. We cannot allow for this to be otherwise. This is all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. And now let's give the floor to School La Corolla. I think they have prepared a video. The COVID-19 recovery, a chance to do things right. This is a project to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 14. Good morning. We are students of this school, La Corolla, representing this project. First of all, we would like to thank the International Society for Bioethics, especially Mr. Marcelo Palacios. Thank you very much for helping us with the SIBI's pedagogical program, but also for being available to help us. We are children, we know, and we were hesitant about doing this. Who is going to listen to us? How can we convince others? We cannot. We have no knowledge. And if those who are educated cannot convince people, we definitely will not be able to do so. But here we are all the same. On the 25th of September 2015, global leaders adopted a world agreement to protect the planet and preserve sustainability with the Sustainable Development Agenda, with a number of objectives with a deadline in the coming 15 years, only 9 left. Global bioethics has an important role to play, fostering dialogue and the adoption of acts and policies that are respectful of dignity and human rights. To achieve these goals, everyone must participate: the governments, the private sector, the civil society, and things like ourselves. Even if we're only 11 years old, we are working in this project to learn more about our oceans and seas and their role in the planet's well-being. We want to commit with helping protecting the planet. It is difficult to commit with something you don't know and raise awareness if you are not aware yourself, and sharing common objectives without being sympathetic with the unknown. You need to be aware that circular economy is key for SDG number 14 to sustain and preserve and protect oceans and marine resources. It's also linked with other SDGs such as number 13 and number 15. Three classes of our school are taking part in this project, and we want to find the way to live together in one planet, respecting each other. The oceans boost global ecosystems, rain, fresh water, the climate, the weather, the oxygen in the air, and the food. A lot of them are provided and regulated by the oceans. The oceans regulates the weather in the inland territories. They can become carbon sums or as carbon sinks, but they can also accelerate climate change. It shows how an ally like the oceans can become an enemy if we don't act in a conscious manner. The next thing to do is tackle the economic crisis. But what about the environment? It should not be the last point in our agendas. We should stay loyal to our commitments and protect the planet and avoid deoxygenization and global warming. It's true that the pandemic has contributed to improving the quality of the air and the water and recovering the ozone layer. Me and my classmates have talked to an expert, and it seems that we are going back to normal. Almost a year has gone by since dolphins were sighted in ports and jellyfish were seen in Venice. We have been gradually increasing consumption and use of plastic, especially single use plastics, both in our homes and in, hospitals. In addition to takeaway packaging, plastic packaging or supermarket plastic bags. Until the pandemic came, 2021 was supposed to be a vital year in the fight against the use of single-use plastics. The society seemed fully committed to fighting the use of plastics, and starting 2021, single-use plastics would be forbidden in the European Union. Last year, our country joined the European Compact on Plastic, an initiative to reduce the unnecessary use of plastics. Currently, it is not feasible to, or it is not allowed to forbid the use of single-use plastics due to health and safety measures related to the pandemic. Some estimates state that there are over 200,000 million tons in the sea, which is increasing year after year. And the victims are the animals who die strangled or choked on plastic parts. A new plastisphere is being created, causing enormous damage to animals and individuals. We need to raise awareness on the compliance with the global agreement on climate change and reduce, reuse, recycle, and repair. With regards to our current situation, the world needs a planet, but we are in red alert. We all know how to interpret traffic lights, green, yellow, and red. But today, on the 25th of May, our planet is in red alert. We should raise awareness among the citizens of the world. Plastic is a mm, material that we need. It doesn't make sense for plastic to be single use. We should reduce and prohibit its use as it was forecast for 2021, as well as creating new rules to govern the creation and manufacturing of plastics. We need to find the root cause of the problem, and develop alternative materials that are biodegradable and recyclable, as well as creating new chemicals that are less pollutant. If we had these solutions, the use of plastics would not be damaging and harming the environment as it is as of today. It is important to uh, keep in mind that the problem of plastic in the oceans will extend along many years after the pandemic. We have to create an environmental impact label for plastic products. That could be an interesting initiative. Or making plastic more expensive could be another solution. We don't need a new life ethics that does not include the rest of living creatures in the planet. We have the responsibility to leave a planet behind that is the same or better than we found it. Our actions take a toll on the planet and they definitely harm our ecosystems. To say goodbye, we will show a video that was filmed by our classmates during the shutdown in Spain. No blue, no green, in the words of no ocean, no life, no ocean, no us, in the words of a famous Spanish expert. With this project, we have learned a lot of things. We are absolutely convinced that we need to save the environment, especially the sea. Life and future of human beings are linked to sustainability of oceans and seas. If you don't want animal in the seas to disappear, please protect your oceans. Jellyfish have been sighted in the canals of Venice. Our project has taught me that we can all protect our oceans. Plastic is not the only enemy of the seas. The pollution, overfishing, and our consumption all also are. Let's enjoy the nature and protect the oceans together. Thank you very much. What an excellent intervention. We loved your reflections and your call to action. Now it's time to talk with Ifutaki. You have the floor.
Eh, bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much for your presentations. They were incredibly interesting. What a pity that I cannot take you out to sea today, but we will talk from afar. How should we proceed?
Ahora los tres colegios podéis lanzándole preguntas a Taki.
You can ask your questions now to Ifutaki. Hello, good morning. My name is Carmen, and I would like to ask you if you had to choose between the underwater and the terrestrial world, which one would you choose? Well, that's an easy question to answer. I will choose underwater. But I was born a human being and I need to breathe air. So I have to live here on the ground. But if I could choose, I would choose to live underwater. Good morning. My name is Marcos, and I wanted to ask you how you feel when you swim next to the animals under the water. It's just like when you're playing with your friends. I don't feel that barrier. I just feel that I'm with a human being. For me, it's the same than playing with an animal. I don't feel a barrier between me and the animal. If you have a cat or a dog, I think you play with them as if they were just another friend or part of your family. It's the same for me. Good morning. My name is Claudia, and I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you, what animal do you enjoy the most? We are mammals, so I see that there is more communication with the marine mammals. I feel closer to them, so I enjoy being around them a lot. Good morning. My name is Carla, and I would like to ask you if you've ever been afraid of swimming with marine animals. Underwater, vibrations travel 4 times faster than here. So, if you are afraid, if you feel fear before you are aware of the fear, animals will feel that fear. So, in nature, fear means I'm your food, eat me up. So that's going to happen if you allow yourself to feel fear. And nature is not like our world where we think and then we act. It's too late to do it that way. So feelings and emotions are very active, are very subtle. So you need to leave your thoughts apart, aside. And whenever there's a change, there's always a sign, so don't lose that sign of sight. Thank you very much, Aifutaki.
de los
Hello, my name is Santiago. What's the strangest place you've swam in? Well, I feel that our world is connected with the sea. For example, the Mediterranean Sea doesn't have many colors, so its fish are also brownish. But the same type of fish, if they live in another sea, another place with more colors, the fish is also more colorful. So I feel that it's connected. And there's a place, if there's a place that's really famous for diving with great visibility and so on, but there has been a storm, or the waters are not transparent anymore, there is no visibility, and the place loses its attractiveness and or its visibility. But the truth is that you can find beauty anywhere. So what I feel is that the world is connected to the sea. My name is Carmela. I would like to ask you, when you're taking the pictures, is there any colleague around you that is also free diving?
o videos.
When I take pictures with mammals, they swim very fast, so it's better for photographers to also free dive. But it's better. In other cases, it's better for the photographers to do scuba diving. So we switch from, we use both depending on the situation. My name is Diego. I would like to ask you, how much time do you spend or do you need to take your photographs? Well, in the sea, in the water, if there is a bad weather that can last for a whole week, or there is no visibility, so it depends on the budget. It depends on the funds available, but at least 1 month. At least staying in one place for at least 1 month is the best thing to do. Hello, I would like to ask you if you have found trash in your excursions. Yes, sadly, I have found a plastic trash on the oceans, but plastics also fly with the wind, or are carried away with the wind. When there's a certain type of current, a lot of plastics are carried over with the current. And I've also seen um, places. I mean, the nature and the animals are very strong. They take what they're given. So for us, it can be trash, but for them, it can mean a new home. So I see two things: how strong nature is, and also what we're doing to it. I see a lot of debris, a lot of trash on the beach, and you pick them up and you think that it's endless, it never ends. But even if you pick up a little bit of it, that makes a great difference, because when it once it's transformed into microplastics, there's nothing you can do. So if you pick up just a little bit of trash, that's better than doing nothing. Good morning again. I would like to ask you, how do you think we can save the seabed? I think that there's no separation between the seabed, the mountains, and our own lives. So I always say that, first of all, we have to take care of ourselves. If we're not healthy, we won't be able to provide health elsewhere. So you need to take care of yourself first, and then take care of your families, your partners, your friends. And that's how you change your mindset. Because if you want to change something, I think you need to change in the inside. You need to change in your heart and not force things to change. So you need to be the first one to change, to take care of yourself, to be in good health, to love yourself, love your family, your friends, your classmates, and you will be able to find your connection also with the seabed. I have a question. If you had to give us one piece of advice, what would it be? It would be to coexist. We don't own the planet. We coexist with each other in this planet. So my question would be, what can we do? Thank you very much. Hello, we would like to ask you, in what country do you find the best regulation protecting the biodiversity? It's very, very difficult to say. There are several countries that don't have that consciousness, but there are also people, individuals who are fighting. So I think you can find Well, I think it depends on the people. It's up to each and every single one of us. And thanks to technology, even if we're not next to each other, we are communicating with each other remotely. So each of us have a very small strength, but if you unite our strengths, and if we unite ourselves, we can achieve great things. So you need to believe that you are doing something that's relevant, that's important, that you're walking into the future, and believe in what you're doing. I think that's the most important thing. I would like to ask you about your first time swimming with animals underwater. Well, I have to admit that I was afraid. Yes. All of a sudden, you see a huge animal in front of you. But as I told you, vibration travels 4 times faster underwater. So animals are also more simple, more direct than us human beings. So if you're not open, there will not be open to you. So I felt that I had to be completely open and not close myself up. They see you and they see how you are. You cannot hide from the animals. So just being with them in a sincere manner. And I feel that animals are always testing me. So if I feel good, if they feel that I am deceiving them, they will leave. That's what I feel. I feel that I cannot hide from them, that they're testing me and testing if I'm being honest with them. This is Claudia again. I would like to ask you, how did you find out that the sea was your passion? Well, since the age of 3, I have been swimming on a competitive level, and I gave it up at a certain point, but the water was always part of my life. And one day I felt that I had to go back into the water. So I was saying to myself, I don't know why, but I want to scuba dive. And so I did it. And as I was underwater, I felt this is my place. This is where I have to stay. And that's how my life underwater began. But when I do scuba diving and you breathe in and breathe out, there is noise and bubbles. So I can spend a lot of time underwater, but I felt that I could not connect with that world. I always felt like an outsider. But when I tried free diving, like marine mammals do, they hold their breath underwater and they go back to the surface to breathe again. I felt that I was doing the same thing as they were, and I felt that I could be just one of them, and that's why I chose to go for free diving. Thank you very much. We would like to ask you if you prefer to dive alone or surrounded by many people. Well, I'd like to share the experience. I'd like to share it with my friends and colleagues. But if I'm going to do it for work, I prefer to do it with as few people as possible.
Hello. I'd like to ask you whether you have any reference in the world of underwater photography, any person you follow or any, I don't know, Any person you admire? Well, the fact is, no. Not really. No, I don't think so. But well, I like documentaries, to watch documentaries on the BBC, Planeta Azul, Blue Planet. Thank you very much for the opportunity to reflect upon the relationship with the world. Thank you. Any further question? You can take advantage of this unique opportunity. Well, we do not have any further questions, but thank you very much to Ai for her time. Thank you. No, we do not have any further questions, but thank you very much for your time. Thank you. And I hope that next time I see you down the sea. Yes, yes. See you. See you there. Thank you so much to you all. Thank you to all students for your participation. Thank you to the teachers for their help and collaboration. Thank you very much to Ai Futaki for helping us connect with beauty and that call upon living together. I think this pedagogical program organized by the SIBI and launched by Marcelo Palacios is a beautiful pearl. And undoubtedly it is giving and it will give more fruits. Thank you very much to you all. Thank you.
Ahora tenemos un...
Now we have a short break and we shall resume talks at 12:30. Thank you.
Buenos días. Continuamos con la sesión de la mañana y tendremos a continuación 3 ponencias. Al final de las mismas puede haber un pequeño tiempo de preguntas. Comenzamos por don Fernando.
We will start with Mr. Fernando Martinez Pintor, the president of the Spanish Association of Psychosomatic Medicine and director of the Barcelona Rheumatology and Medical Anthropology Institute. His talk is entitled Pain, Suffering, and Today's Technology. My dear friends, it is a great pleasure for me to participate in this International World Congress on Bioethics. I have to thank Professor Marcelo Palacios personally for the invitation to be here with you today. the relationship between pain, suffering, biotechnologies, and bioethics are extremely close. I have worked with pain, with the topic of pain, throughout my entire professional life. Let's talk about the first work on the relationship between the mind and the body. And I have to quote here the work by René Descartes, who wrote the discourse on the method, a book in which he reflected upon something like this. Jacques Lacan, as we know, set the beginning of the modern philosophy, of modern culture. However, Descartes was already thinking about this. He stated that the soul by which I am, what I am, is completely distinct from the body. It's surprising that this reflection was made in the 17th century, but Mr. Damasio from the Stanford University talked about the the fact that this differentiation by Descartes is still present today. However, in the 1960s, Ronald Melzack from the McGill University in Canada carried out a deep research of the dimensions of pain, how pain could impact the emotional state of a person. He talked of the first dimension when you feel the pain, say, in your knee, and that he named the sensory dimension. The patient feels that his knee is aching. That pain reaches the somatosensorial area of the brain, and the patient feels the pain. However, if the pain persists and increases, there is a second dimension, the motivational affective dimension, according to Melzack, with disorders, emotional disorders, such as a certain degree of anxiety. Why is this pain persisting? Why do I have to suffer this pain? And the patient starts to feel sadness. And then, if that pain persists on the long term, there is a third dimension in which the patient starts to feel social phobia, phobia against people, environmental phobia, and the patient perceives normal sensations as being pathological. It's normal for an aged person to feel pain in their knees if they crouch, but they see it as a pathology, and then a certain degree of a catastrophic feeling. The patient only thinks about the pain, be it in the lower back, in their head, or whatever. So these are the three dimensions confirmed by practice, in which emotions of the person take an increasingly important role, starting in the sensory, purely sensory dimension. But the pain was most researched in the 1980s. For example, Mr. Euros discovered or wrote about fibromyalgia. Philip Helm from the San Diego University was the first one to ever talk about fibromyalgia as such. But Euros said he conducted research with 50 patients who had uh, felt pain with pressure on different points that was cited by the World Health Organization. And the truth is that the turn that things took was rather regrettable, giving place to the movement of the fibro deniers, which led to the publication of many articles, many papers as a result. But in the 1980s, the first paper was written by Eric Castle from New York, and he defined suffering in a very specific manner. He defined suffering as a state that is perceived as a threat to the integrity of the person, regardless of the cause. So, suffering is a threat to the integrity of the person. In the 1980s, the first definition of pain was published by Mr. Ford Blights of the IASP. He defined pain as a uh, emotional and sensory sensation linked to an emotional and sensory experience that was unpleasant. That is quite a cold definition, so to speak. Along the 1980s, evidence based medicine started to become more and more prominent. And if you read the work by David Sackett, he didn't underestimate the concept of measurement so much. And intuition in medicine is also fundamental, and that is the, let's say, the art in medicine. Recently, in 2019, 2020, more than 800 epidemiologists under the lead of a professor from the Lausanne University, Sander Trillian, has said that these publications from the 80s were somewhat deceiving, where only statistics are taken into consideration without looking at the type of sample, the quality of the sample, the design of the study, and so on and so forth. Same goes for protocol. As per protocol, and when you do things and when you perform a diagnosis only based on a number of protocols that are not consistently reviewed or revised, they become unchanged over time, and very often they lack. It doesn't make sense to make the patient subject to a given study. So evidence or proof-based medicine is being gradually replaced by the values that Fernando Lolas and Diego Gracia have truly developed and pushed, and with which I certainly relate. However, I should note that in 1983, Clifford Wolf published the Central Hypersensitivity Syndrome, only as a hypersensitivity of very specific neurons, which were affected by a number of external mechanisms, such as hysteria. Jurus was the one who took this concept of hypersensitivity and contributed with the presence of the autonomous nervous system. And most importantly, he contributed with that the sense of importance of biopsychosocial factors in the development of the diagnosis. As you know, the autonomous system, among many others, such as the endogen pain modulation system, are based in the limbic system, and they favor hypersensitivity as described by Wolf in Harvard. So it is of the utmost importance to take into account how, for the first time, the psychosocial context of the patient intervenes in the diagnosis of pain, such as the central hypersensitivity syndrome. We have observed this in patients with central hypersensitivity syndrome. They are nihilist. They don't feel happy, or they don't feel like they want to do anything. They tend to be very perfectionist. There is also a disorder in assertivity. They find it very difficult to explain and also to contradict anything that is said to them. And there's also something that I would like to highlight. Ernest Billiot in the 19th century, in the golden era of hypnosis, talked about the diseases of the will: hypochondria, obsessive disorders, abulia. The patient says very often, I would do a lot of things, but I just don't have the strength. Um, Procrastination also. And our patients also frequently show a state of difficulty in facing suffering. And very often they use an approach called weakness. There was an author that say that weakness is a very powerful pain, a very powerful weapon. And I know that I have seen patients who have this weakness. They say, I could go there, but I have such terrible headaches. I could do this, but I've had a terrible night, and so on. And as part of our work, we also look into cognitive emotional sensitivation, as per Mr. Russell. There is a feeling of guilt, a magnifying approach, and also the fact that things persist over time, their beliefs. So the whole concept of including the biopsychosocial aspect and mentioning that in central hypersensitivity syndrome for the first time led to the Karolinska Institute, under the lead of Eva Koset, to speaking of the nociplastic pain in 2016. That is when there is no clear tissue damage evidence or real damage evidence. It's an altered perception. It's obviously, evidently, it is altered by hypersensitivity, as well as biopsychosocial aspects, as we've mentioned. As a result of this, the World Health Organization modified their definition of pain and substituted it with a definition that was much more real. They spoke for the first time ever of biological, psychological, and social factors to include fibromyalgia. And it says that nociplastic pain is identified together with social, psychological aspects. So, for the first time ever, fibromyalgia is included among a number of important factors, a number of social and psychological factors that are important. The International Organization for Pain Research stated in 2018, they modified the pain definition, the definition provided by Fordyce in the 1980s. So, among the many papers that were published then defining pain, this one stood out, and it still stands out. The definition of Mr. Cohen, who speaks of a somatic experience that is recognizable by oneself and by others. That means that someone who is not ourselves can perceive the pain. If a patient cannot express themselves, they cannot talk, a third person, someone else, can perceive that they're feeling pain. But this definition also includes the concept of the threat, a threat to the physical or existential integrity of the person. In the 1980s definition of suffering, a mention was already made of the threat to physical integrity. That was 2018, and in 2020, with neurologist Claudia Sommer being the chairwoman of this institution, the definition was again modified, and it's really similar. It speaks of an unpleasant sensory and physical experience, but it introduces a number of points. First, the pain can be recognized both by the patient themselves, but also by others, as suggested by Mr. Cohen. But also, it also states that the pain has adverse effects on the functionality and the welfare, both psychological and social, of the person. Now, if we bring into this the definition of suffering by Castle in the 1980s, if you replace welfare with a sense or a feeling of an unpleasant experience, we see that we have different matters, different things, and but however, both definitions are almost the same. They are really not the same, even if it could appear at first sight that they are. Pain is very often comes very often with suffering when it cannot be when it's unbearable, when it cannot be forecast, when it will end, when there is uncertainty, when there is a chronic pain if it lasts for 8 months, when a health professional does not understand or hear the patient, when the patient is feeling that they're being left behind. There's a tribe in Central Africa, in Central Tanzania, where the most common cause of death, these are nomad people like we used to be 1 million years ago. So the most common death cause is when they cannot keep up with the group during migrations, when they are left behind. And so Aswaga felt that many patients are also left behind. They are not attended to or tended to by society or by a healthcare professional. Another cause that can lead to suffering is when there is no social support, when the pain felt by the patient cannot be expressed across social media, or whenever their social or legal environment is not providing necessary support. The role of the notion, the concept of the role of the sick person, very often, if the health professional does not assess or diagnose the patient, they will not find support around them, be it social or legal. How can we improve the pain, the suffering, by creating a medicine that is based on projects, on values, and on ideas, helping to improve social resilience and also the resilience of health professionals? In the words of Jasper, creating that existential communication with our patients, that existential communication that is based on spirituality, on transcendence. There is no doubt when you talk about existential communication and spirituality, the concept of Hilaire Desjardins comes to mind, where all ideas intersect, the union of all intellectual capacities, and also the concept of dark matter as studied by astrophysicists. Mr. Wolf disregarded the relationship between the body and the mind. But as Damasio says, if we don't consider the spirit, the place where that existential communication stated by Casper takes place, we will also be induced to error. And what about biotechnology? The ease of communication, of taking samples and performing tests, that is supported by biotechnology. However, um, the patients have information versus knowledge. Health professionals provide knowledge and not just information. The patient is constantly being manipulated in their thinking. They are made passive, and they have find it difficult to express their pain in their social media and their social networks. You can see on social media that everyone seems happy. All is published is pictures being happy. And so we are no longer communicating with our closest ones. And then remote medicine. No physician likes remote medicine. We have been unfortunately forced to treat remotely, but that the relationship was that was so important for Pierre Nasi, being able to touch the patient, to see the patient, to talk to them in person. And that's why I want to highlight the importance of moral values, of technical values, but above all, the bioethical values. Creating a project, making our patients feel motivated um, within a framework of rationalized values. Diagnostic tests. I'm including this one because patients love technologies, and there's always a test to conduct. There's always a medical device to use. Tests don't heal, but that's how patients see it sometimes. Nonverbal communication and the vocabulary of the eyes. You can see it in the patients when you have a patient, and sometimes the doctor is looking at the computer screen more than at the patient because there's a whole bunch uh, of of forms or questionnaires they have to fill in, and they are um, looking at the screen and not their patient. And I think that's one of the hurdles of technologies that is being harmful for the clinical relationship. I prefer to use clinical relationship as a term instead of doctor-patient relationship, because when you use the word clinical relationship, you're including physiotherapists, psychologists, nurses, and so it's a wider concept. That's all from me. I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to thank you for the invitation. And Marcelo, it's been a pleasure, and I remain at your disposal. Thank you very much, Mr. Martinez Pintor, for your interesting talk. And now we will hand the floor over to Professor Jose Antonio Flores Lozano, professor at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences of the University of Oviedo and a member of the Royal Academies of Medicine and Surgery of Galicia and Valladolid. And his talk is entitled Ethical and Emotional Impact of COVID-19 Mega Stress on Physicians. Mr. Flores Lozano, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I am absolutely thankful and grateful for the invitation, dear President, dear friend Marcelo Palacios, who is the mind behind this conference that is casting its light throughout the universe. I'm going to talk about the most significant aspects of a book that I have just published. And it will be accompanied by a number of slides that I will be commenting on. Mega stress is the disrupting scenario, a dull and frightening scenario where the enemy is invisible. And most certainly, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a significant toll on many patients, but also many physicians, many of which have also passed away. Waiting times have increased, the quality of life has decreased, and mega stress, fear, and uncertainty have increased among health professionals. There is always a third, a fourth, a fifth problem coming over. The doctor, the physician, is collapsing physical and mentally. We had studied the physician burnout in the past, but not with the same intensity, with the same cataclysm that we are experiencing today. There is no break for physicians, no breath to take. The pandemic has been an enormous challenge for all healthcare professionals. Many of us have worked months long with no holidays, with no breaks, without a breath, and we have found emotional burnout that is enormous among health professionals. The delays continue to add up, and some interventions have waiting times of over 1 year. Care in hospitals and healthcare centers is now also a challenge. Many people have to wait very long, and many physicians and health professionals have to work overtime. So we are seeing that the doctors are trapped in an awful burnout, a sort of a mega stress where their physical and psychological strengths are almost inexistent.
Pandemic is testing the health system, and physicians and nurses are exhausted. In India, for example, we face horrible scenes and of collapse of the health system, scenes that do not have any precursors. Some patients without any bed, without any oxygen, without any dignified goodbye, and some relatives asking for help without any response, a kind of apocalypse. 40% of the contagious cases in India. Just in one day, more than 3,500 people have died due to COVID-19. And the WHO says that the crisis is like a perfect storm where religious events have occurred, vaccination, and different variants of the virus with new mutations. And also mega stress has a lot to do with the decision competence of the physician, which we have also experienced in our country, who lives and who dies. And that is one of the most stressful factors and the most moving factor as well. When resources are exhausted and they are not enough for all the patients in hospital, then there is a moral stress, the mental shock, which is a drama and is horrible, and it results in severe emotional conditions or disorders. And therefore, here we have a cascade of psychopathological elements, frustration, irritability, aggressiveness, not only in the physician, but also in the patient and relatives. Physicians, after this war year, embedded in suffering. Now they have to standardize all the appointments, but the physician thinks and reflects. We have always been close to the patients. We have never abandoned our patients, and we want to take care of the patient with greater quality and more warmth, something that has not been able to occur, to happen due to the mega stress. Physicians are, left without any physical energy. They do not have any more motivation to continue working. All those reminders of suffering, death, etc., sticks to their minds and their memory, and constantly the physician is facing extreme situations. And in this volcanic situation, more than 80% of professionals have mentioned they have experienced in recent days decrease in appetite, tremor, sleeplessness, and loss of appetite, even nightmares. So that is part of the mega stress. And we also have to add cognitive symptoms that are related to COVID-19, the ones we call the brain fog. It also appears very strongly, and it is a set of symptoms focused on the reduction of mental accuracy. And of course, physicians cannot do multitasking in an efficient way, and therefore there is a greater risk of making mistakes. So this brain fog decreases performance of the memory in the short and long term. It is a syndrome that has been observed in neuroimmunological disorders with syndrome of postural tachycardia as an initial phase of Alzheimer, for example. It has also been diagnosed in those patients with chemotherapy. They can also experience the brain fog. Maybe inflammatory molecules secreted in the brain contribute to the pathogenesis of this syndrome, developed and promoted or boosted by COVID-19, this virus that can overcome and surpass the hematoencephalic barrier. And therefore, we are facing a deterioration of different functions, behavioral function, memory function, etc., etc. So the mega stress is a huge force that results in a psychological condition and that affects us, and we cannot control and we cannot deactivate. It is like a huge iceberg. We can also see the surface, and we do not know what is underlying or underwater. It is something like Camus mentioned the Nobel Prize in 1957. Gods had condemned Sisyphus to transport endlessly an object to the summit of the mountain, and the stone, due to its own weight, would fall down again down the mountain. And we think there is no greater punishment than work without hope. So we're facing a situation that is very complicated from the mental standpoint, from the point of view of work responsibility, from an ethical standpoint, because bioethics goes hand in hand with the generosity. And this means an ethical commitment, a moral virtue related to the physician's work, and also aesthetic, that is the pleasure of the work well done. But when we have been attacked in such an intensity, in such a way, these skills and competencies have vanished. Also, when trying to make an effort to be updated in terms of this new disease or condition, or to show calm when you are not calm. After all, I think it is important to recover this bioethical care quality care to patients, to individuals, trying to promote teamwork, continuous learning, continuous training to avoid uncertainties, this calm attitude, compassion, the development of all values. Values are the best weapons against this pandemic. And when faced by such big noise, media noise, an antidote is silence. Silences that are very eloquent, but our patients have not asked for it. Silences that we can find in music, for example, Sounds of Silence, song by Simon and Garfunkel, a very interesting reflection to focus our emotions that have been frozen due to that tsunami. COVID-19. Here on these slides, I don't know whether you can show the first one. Yes, but here we can see the mental shock of the pandemic with all the features and characteristics of the mega stress suffered by the physician in that suffering. Anxiety, depressive symptoms, anxiety, panic attacks, a lot of concern, a lot of fear. We can move on to the next slide. And here we can see the emotional tsunami with these symptoms, which are specific and are very clear. For example, the lack of energy, the apathy, the rhythmopathy, because, well, the people cannot sleep anymore, there is sleeplessness, all the mood disorders, and everything that has to do with the lack of communication or miscommunication. This, situation we have faced that has not allowed us to communicate, especially nonverbal communication I am referring to, of course. We move on. Okay. For us, it is very important to develop or to treasure those basic ethical principles that you can see here on the slide. For example, moral autonomy, integrity, dignity, that is the needs of the human being that are based on the freedom or the capacity of freedom, the capacity to feel, to think, to decide, and which have been diminished. So we have to recover those ethical values that are based on this principle. The human dignity is based on the axioma that the human being is a sacred thing or a sacred being. Please move on. Next slide, please. Next. Perfect. But what have we experienced? Well, a process of dehumanization. Of course, there are many beauties out there, but there is no greater beauty than mankind. This was written by Sophocles in Antigona. So we have to focus more and more on the individual. Or as Rob Carballo also mentioned in 1954, we have to take also into account the set of functions, but not only that, also the personal history. The man is nature and history. We have seen many patients that have feared of death, but also fear of abandonment and also isolation. Ivan Illich, great writer, he wrote Tolstoy. He cried why this horror of solitude, the one that we have experienced? Sorry, if the speaker moves away from the microphone, we cannot hear. And simply the gesture of the tact, of the touch of the son Escobar was enough to suffocate or to diminish that anxiety. This is what I wanted to highlight. The solitude that has arrived here to stay for so many months, and which is the most severe ailment. So we need to develop hope. This is a medicine that has to be promoted and boosted, and we have to develop it. And it is based on a system of beliefs. When there is hope, when there is a ray of hope, there is a very important brain functioning. The brain cortex, the left one, generates positive thoughts. A physician has to generate that ray of hope to find some sense, to try to alleviate the suffering, and that is very efficient from the therapeutic standpoint. I'm going to continue because I do not have much time left, so maybe during Q&A we can elaborate on this if you wish. So I was saying that we have to recover warmth, focusing on life and the most precious thing of the human being. A great poet from India, a Nobel Prize of Literature in 1913, Rabindranath Tagore, mentioned that life is nothing but the beauty of existing. That is the beauty that we have to recover and look after. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Flores. We will now give the floor to the very last presentation. Ms. Amante Lucia Chacon Arteaga, chair of the president of the chair in La Habana, a member of the Cuban Committee on Bioethics. The title of her talk is Bioethic Education and its Contribution in the Responsible Use of Biotechnologies in Society. Founding president, as we said, of the ethics chair applied to education. Thank you very much for having invited me to be here this morning. It is a pleasure to participate from here, from the Caribbean in America, and connecting to Spain. Thank you very much to Dr. Marcelo, because he has worked hard for this event to be held. And also thank you very much to the technical team, above all, the person who has helped me for all this time, Ida. Thank you very much for your help. We have made joint efforts to present my talk today. In this case, I think it has been very interesting to have listened to the talks by the doctors before me, talking about pain, suffering, stress. As a professor with an experience of more than 50 years of experience, time flies, at my university, founder of my chair on ethics, and as a member of the Cuban Ethics Committee, I would like to highlight here today the importance we confer to ethics and bioethics education to develop the values such as social responsibility. This is a value that is demanded nowadays very much to develop science, technology, biotechnology products. But it is being tested. These materials have been tested during pandemic. And the previous speakers before me have already referred to this. Maybe we can start to show the slides. Well, these are the credits of our work, but I'd like to share with you in the next slide the academic slogan that we have created or designed. We started to work on ethics applied to education. All education, all training action has an ethical dimension. That is the slogan, the quote that you can see on the slide, because all education and training, non-formal and formal education likewise, is aiming at the good, to try to form people who are good people and who do good acts or actions. So if the good is on the basis, is the basis and the pillar of all kind of training, then we need to guide with an intention our education, our training. This slogan, academic slogan, is an idea we have developed scientifically throughout all the research projects we have implemented with our multidisciplinary team in our university. And we have also validated it in the practice during training, during education, because our university is a pedagogical university, but for us, education is a good that is attached to the human being, and it is public education for free for everybody. So we always put into practice the fact that educating is a task of everybody. Everybody has to educate. Next slide, please. And of course, we address the topic of social responsibility, because this is something that was also present at the preliminaries of this Congress. This concept, this ethical category, we're talking about three kinds of responsibility. It is safeguarded by ethical fundaments and the moral content. From Aristotle's times, the first ethical treaty was given to us by Aristotle or by his son, and he highlighted the role of virtues. But in that book, Aristotle insisted that the training of virtues is closely related to the training of personality, and that was in the habit. In the habit since we are a child or we are children, and this has been an eternal truth for all these years. From that standpoint, at that age, responsibility was a virtue, a quality, and today it is a value, and therefore it contains a moral content, and it is on the basis of all the training processes or education processes. So the development of productive force of the technology, the development of the need of the industry, of the company, and all this system that is related to economy of countries and the global economy. And this has resulted in focusing on social responsibility led by the business world, the economic world, the business world. That is the social responsibility we are referring to. So in that sense, the social responsibility with this approach has different denominations or definitions in different places worldwide. However, we would like to underscore that the advance of that business responsibility, corporate responsibility of the organizations also has to take into account the moral responsibility, because that is the nucleus of all social responsibility. Next slide, please. From this point of view, social responsibility is understood, comprehended from a technological and bioethical approach, and above all, from the approach promoted by our research work in our chair, that is the axiological ethical approach. We validate the ethical content of social responsibility that bioethics leaves to that field the development of technologies and its transfer in terms of the handling and management of human being and global life. And above all, as the previous speakers mentioned, the human being. So from this approach, social responsibility is different. We have to make a difference between the social sphere and the individual sphere, because in this sense, social responsibility from an ethical and bioethical standpoint has that dynamic, that dialectic. It is a responsibility that has to belong to the individual, that will depend on the career training, individual training of that subject, so that it may become a social responsibility. But it should also have specific features in terms of pedagogy. We can continue. From this point of view, the social standpoint and ethical standpoint, as the Cuban member of our committee mentions as well, Dr. Carlos Delgado, we cannot think that technology is good or bad. What is obvious is that technology, in its general sense, as an application of knowledge, it has had good intentions. It was developed to solve problems of human development. However, we also know that uses and applications have not had the same good intentions. And thus, we now face certain ethical dilemmas, moral dilemmas, bioethical problems or dilemmas as well. We continue. Next slide, please.
And therefore, we come to the problem, to the statement of the problem which doesn't come from the past 21 years in the 2000s. It comes all the way from Albert Einstein when he published and stated his historical message to the 43rd Conference of Science and Progress in Italy, and which was acknowledged as the moral duty of a scientist. And Albert Einstein was very concerned based on his own experience with his discoveries and the turn that at the time they took. And so he told all the thoughtful scientists of the world and sensible scientists of the world that it is a moral duty for all scientists to discover the objective truth, whatever truth it is, and not to be subject to economic and political powers, morally and ethically blind. It's a sort of a bad omen of what he thought could happen to humankind in the next years. But we also have Potter, the father of bioethics, and he told us about the need to have a global ethics, a profound ethics, an ethics of life, an ethics that is a bridge to future, a bridge between science, technology, and life. And we have Edgar Morin, who in his book about the 7 pillars of education of the UNESCO devotes a whole chapter 7, to the ethics of the millennium, the ethics of humankind, which he called anthropoethics, and he thought that it had a role to play in this millennium. He wrote this book, and we were at the beginning of the 2000s. So with this problematic, and if we can move to the next slide, please. With this problematic, and this is the question that we are raising, why are we still speaking of ethics and bioethics? Well, on the slide, we have summed up the characteristics of the time that we are living. We have stark contrasts and contradictions in the middle of the development of science and technology. And however, many social scientists or political scientists, researchers, or even housewives, each and every single one of us agree that humankind is living through an ethical crisis. So we have to keep on talking about ethics and bioethics. And that's why we want to highlight the role of education. Why ethics and bioethics together with education and culture become one thing and interact with each other, helping people in their behaviors, in their moral choices, in their jobs, are able to tell apart when they are faced with dilemmas and conflicts. And you always have to make a choice that is ethical and bioethical. So in this regard, and we move to the next slide, it is important to highlight something that has already been addressed by the previous speakers. There is ethics, bioethics, education, and culture, and all of them are based on the foundation of moral of moral values, global solidarity, justice, equity, a dialogue, and sustainable development, which make out social responsibility. The role of education, we want to advocate for it today because very early in the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro stated that the future of Cuba had to be the future of scientists, of science, men and women. The role of science and technology the development of in the development of our country was what was going to open doors for our country when it comes to evolution and development. So if we move to the next slide, please. In Cuba, Cuban biotechnology experienced significant development, and I'm not going to read the entire slide. You can see the milestones on the screen with regards to the development experienced by Cuba in terms of biotechnology, the pharmaceutical industry, the research that has been conducted in these fields. And you can see that the first action highlighted by Dr. Agustin Laje, a renowned researcher and a leader in biotechnology in Cuba, he said that the first thing that was the basis for everything that came after it was the great literacy campaign in 1961, sorry, because if people are not able to read and write, you will not be able to make science and technology progress because they require a very profound preparation and education. So, in this regard, today, in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is something that is considered in this work, there has been a test and it has been validated that scientists, technology experts, and everyone, including teachers, lecturers, and university students, not only in Cuban medical sciences, but across all universities, including mine, they all have a role in fighting against and controlling the pandemic. And so on this slide, I have included some fundamentals which, together with bioethics and ethics in Cuba, have made it possible for us to manage the fight against this terrible situation the world is living. But solidarity and cooperation of all forces, beginning by an interim workforce chaired by the president and in collaboration with the entire government, with multidisciplinary scientists, with the entire structure of the civil defense, with the complete process of information, of instruction and training, and including the population, we have been able to monitor and identify people who might be infected with the virus and provide 100% health coverage in our territory in the face on the pandemic. And there have been 5 vaccine candidates in Cuba, and that speaks for an ethical and bioethical training and spirit of our scientists. And I would like to end my talk by mentioning that Dr. Jose Acosta, and bioethicist, or as we all know him, Pepe Acosta, he is the director of the Cuban Ethical and Bioethical Committee, which has been monitoring the whole research process of the 5 possible vaccines. So the entire procedure has been monitored in terms of bioethics, and Dr. Acosta has also made appearances on TV to explain the bioethical assessment of the 5 clinical tests of the vaccine candidates. You can see on the slide things that I was not able to delve into, but things like solidarity. The Cuban medical brigades have gone to a number of countries to provide support to local doctors in facing the pandemic and sharing experiences with them. And only by advocating for bioethical values with solidarity, unity, and collaboration, we will be able to make that global social responsibility a reality and overcome the difficult times the humankind is going through right now. Thank you very much, Dr. Marcelo Palacios. I would like to thank the SIBI and the organizers for allowing me to be here with you today. Thank you very much, Ma'am Chacon, and the rest of the speakers for sticking to your allocated time. Is there a question here at the conference hall, or perhaps an online question? If there are no questions, perhaps I could ask Dr. Fernando Martinez Pintor, how do you think we could promote that value-based medicine you spoke about? Good morning again. It is a pleasure to be with you all. And I must say that the other 2 speakers have been magnificent. Value-based medicine has 2 fundamental aspects. The first aspect is something where we all agree on: justice, truth, peace, and the truth. Those values remain unchangeable, but there are other values that do change over time. What today is regarded as absolutely moral will be abhorring in the future, and that is something that we can see in developing countries. They will see in a few years' time that current practices are not tolerable. I fully agree with what Ma'am Chacon has said. I fully agree with her views. The importance of creating knowledge, the importance of transferring the knowledge to the new generations, as Bertrand Russell used to say, they justify life, love, freedom, responsibility, and conveying, sharing, transferring what we have learned in our lives to the upcoming generations. Even Kant mentioned how important this was. I believe that the concept of education and knowledge is fundamental, and I would like to make a statement here. I think that the lack of education is something journalists can be blamed for, and I believe that this pandemic has shown that some media focus on what can be more controversial as stimulus behind another. As we can see with the pandemic, I think the media should play a more relevant and a more conscious role. And also the spirituality of people. I think that it's going to make values of education be gradually implemented in society. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Mr. Flores, how do you think you can cultivate hope? That was your proposal to overcome the current situation or the situation of some doctors. Well, it is very complicated. We don't have a drug that acts immediately. That is, as a matter of fact, the big problem of COVID-19. I've heard a doctor say, I stay hopeful and I want to be part of the solution. Of course, hope has a lot to do with everything we've mentioned and all the assumptions that have been addressed by my two colleagues. Yes, all of this has a lot to do with spirituality, with resilience, with psychological integrity, with strength, and with staying positive, with maintaining a positive attitude, positive thinking. And it has a lot to do with love to make it the best drug or one of the best drugs. Love is one of the best drugs without the shadow of a doubt. But we need to have an action line. We cannot improvise. And we are very much aware that hope is the last thing you lose, especially in critical moments. We are aware of this and we need to highlight, we need to state that in such tragic situations, in the trenches of death, despair, and suffering, for many doctors, hope has saved them, and hope has also saved a lot of patients. And I do believe that there is a mental, an immune, and a physical strength residing in hope because it has been um, it has been shown and concluded that hope helps in the recovery process. So I think that's something we can use to be a step ahead. The easy thing to do is interrupt our patients, to leave them behind. The difficult thing to do and what's truly humane is hope. Thank you very much. And now I have a question for Mrs. Chacon. Perhaps you could elaborate on what you touched upon, the importance of education in the next 5 minutes, if that's possible. Firstly, I would like to say something. Here in Cuba, in the philosophical, ethical, bioethical debate of our country, we have conducted an analysis to understand bioethics from a viewpoint that is global and cross-cutting or multidisciplinary. That means bioethics was first first entered the area of medicine. I think the field of medicine were the first one to embrace ethics, bioethics, and they've also been the ones who have developed it. So we also wanted to open up that vision to provide it with a holistic approach, a multidisciplinary approach, and that is why it has a role in education. In our countries, all centers have bioethics or ethics committees in all universities, in all training centers where professionals are trained in several areas. And we work on these values from very early ages in schools. We have programs or national schemes, such as one called Educate Your Child. And so it aims at providing a healthy education, an education in values and principles, in the relationship between parents and their children. So that means that for us, ethics and bioethics is already present in national schemes, not only PhD or master's degrees, but also in the curriculum of professional training at universities. I also trained the first doctor in pedagogical sciences, and her thesis was around bioethical education. And in the curriculum of the university degrees for teachers, bioethical is also one subject. We have a TV program with a school teacher who talks about bioethics in science, in teaching sciences, and with all of this, I also have, as a matter of fact, the opportunity to do a TV show in Cuban television called Ethics and Society, and we had a section devoted to bioethics. The contents of that section were disseminated across the country in the form of prints. And in that TV show, I invited teachers, researchers, philosophers, scientists, physicians. I mean, philosophy has been a poor issue in our country when you talk about bioethics, and a consensus was reached that bioethics had to be included in general training and professional training more specifically. That is what I can tell you. We have a lot of experience. We have doctors who have been trained in education, not only medical doctors, and they work on this issue. So yes, we are doing as much as possible. You know that not always everyone believes in the importance of values and philosophical matters such as bioethics and ethics, and they are working, or we rather are working on these matters, and we are the ones who have to boost these issues to play a role in the consciousness of people. Thank you very much. Dr. Palacios would like to take the floor. Thank you very much. And I thank all of the speakers for their brilliant interventions. A mention has been made about how to walk towards hope. The truth is, nothing is going to change if we don't change. And I'm wondering, are we ready? Are we willing to change? If humankind humankind forgets about its strategies very early, and we go back to normal inequality, poverty, hunger, racism, those are issues that have always been part of our history, and they show us that ethical pollution is the greatest problem of humankind. We're talking a lot about the greenhouse effect and environmental pollution right now, but perhaps we should reflect upon that ethical pollution of humankind. Dear Isolina, I will tell you, and I will tell even myself, that bioethics has to be the path towards a new existential philosophy where responsibility and educating in the importance of responsibility is a core issue. And so that these environmental pollution, so that climate change doesn't become just another problem of human contamination, of human pollution, perhaps we should ask ourselves, what are we willing to give up? Are we willing to share? Because at the end of the day, words are wind. We need action. We need humankind to become aware that its main purpose is themselves, and for that, humankind needs the values stated by all three speakers in their intervention. That was my humble contribution to your brilliant talks. Thank you very much. Dr. Isolina would like to. Oh, she's given me 4 minutes. So all of us have addressed education, but it seems that we're talking about formal education, and we've listened to Professor Chacon speak about the family, and Dr. Marcelo has also mentioned the importance of family education. In our families, we're also educated in emotionally, in emotional terms. Science without a consciousness is not going to be successful. So now more than ever, we believe that effective emotional education, which is based on interacting with our parents, with their smile, their dedication, and that communication, that patience that is shown by parents, that is where we are building the foundation for a human behavior that is responsible. We were talking about hope, but for the physician to have hope, they need patience. And where do you see that patience? Where are you educated in terms of patience? At home. But if we're all buzzing through the day from 9 to 10, we're not able to build patience. So effective education, emotional education in within the family and at home is very important. And that's what I wanted to contribute with from the very beginning. Love, affection, communication are the core of human education from its very beginning, of humankind, and also the engagement with education, commitment with education, because we are not aware of the capacity of education and being educated at home within our family.
Sabiendo que a las 14 horas
We have 4 minutes left, and we need to close this by 1400. Yes, Nancy, please go ahead. I fully support and agree with what the doctor has just said. That is indeed the foundation. The problem is that the spirituality is fading away in today's world. And we have to recover that area of human feeling. We need to recover love, and let's say the best thing that humankind has in order to eradicate any manifestation of violence, of refusal, of hatred, etc. We know that, for example, in Spain, there is a strong presence of social pedagogy, because parents and families, as the great minds of the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries said, educators also need to be educated. And so parents need to be given a number of resources to achieve that basic foundation in our children. I think that society will never do enough to be able to achieve that in every family in our countries, every family in humankind. The humankind will see its environment the same way they see themselves. Thank you very much. I must say that this has been an extremely interesting debate, and I think this brings us back to what we were saying at the beginning of the morning, where someone said that we have to coexist with each other, and we need to find the links that connect us with each other and with our planet. And as Nancy Chacon was saying, we need an education that makes us better people. I will now hand the floor over to Dr. Marcelo Palacios to close this session. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers and the participants, and we will resume the conference at 5 o'clock.